Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we got another offseason preview here to discussing the Minnesota Wild and the Buffalo Sabres, the 11th and 12th teams eliminated in this year's run to the playoffs. We'll see why they were both eliminated, we'll look at their RFAs, UFAs, and draft capital for this upcoming offseason, and we'll figure out what they can do in the offseason to try and improve and get back to the playoffs next year. We'll get to all of that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the Internet Talking Channel. Before we get into the video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for your support. I'm able to do with all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below, and don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below discussing today's video. Now, in today's video, we got another offseason preview video here to discuss looking at the Buffalo Sabres and the Minnesota Wild. Now, both of these teams originally, before our season, I was expecting to make the playoffs. I wasn't expecting them to have an egregious amount of points totals. I wasn't expecting them to get over 100. I was expecting them to barely make the playoffs, but I thought the Wild were probably entering this year the third best team in the Central Division, and I think a lot of other people agree with me there that after Dallas, Colorado, there was a pretty sizable gap who the next Central team was. But I think going into the season, a lot of people thought Minnesota could easily be number 3. Meanwhile, for the Buffalo Sabres, everyone was expecting them to be a little bit better this year. I was expecting them to only have a handful more points than they did last year, but I wasn't expecting them to have enough to make the playoffs in the Atlantic Division, and for both sides, I was completely wrong. So we'll start with the Buffalo Sabres, as they were the first of those two eliminated. So for the Sabres, 3 reasons in my opinion why they missed the playoffs. 1, lower goal scorer than last year. I mean, the Sabres are not doing an awful job at scoring goals this year. I mean, they're outside the bottom 10, so that's really good, but they are 11th lowest in the NHL in goal scoring, which isn't good. But compared to last year, where I think they had over like 300 and something goals, and they were 3rd highest in the NHL in goals scored, compared to this year, where they only scored 246 goals, and we're 11th lowest in the NHL right now, that's a pretty sizable difference. And 60 goals is going to give you 7 points difference, which is what they have. So yes, the Sabres did not have an overly great offensive season. There were still guys like Middleton before he was traded, Tuck, Thompson, who definitely did have good years, but maybe not to the same extent that they did last year. So definitely they had a lot of really good seasons from a lot of really great players last year in the offensive category. This year wasn't as good of it, and because they were trying to play a more defensive style game, they sort of strayed away from their offensive role that got them so many goals last year. So that's probably reason 1, in my opinion, as to why the Sabres team missed the playoffs. They could not score enough goals to get them enough wins to get them into the playoffs. 2 was goalie troubles early on. Early on in the season, they started Levi. I thought he could be the starter that they need right now, but coming off college, it was not really an overly smart move for the Sabres to try and start Levi right away, and Levi never really looked good early on. Ukko-Pekka has been inconsistent in earlier years, so they were reluctant to go to him. Comrie was still more of a backup at that point in time, so their goaltending situation was really askew for the first month and a half, maybe even 2 months of the season, while they were trying to figure out what worked. Then by December, January, they sort of put Ukko-Pekka in as a starter, Comrie as the backup, sent Levi down to get some conditioning over in the AHL. That worked out well for all parties involved. Levi went to the AHL, worked fantastic, while Ukko-Pekka was one of the best goalies in the AHL after the calendar flipped to 2024, so it worked out all really well. So I think the inconsistency starting Levi at the NHL level, not having Luukkonen play a consistent role, I think all really were contributing factors early on, and I think the start early on with the goaltending situation was a big reason as to why the Sabres team fell below 500 for the most part, and were never able to get back above 500 until late into the season. So not great stuff there for the Sabres. I think the goalie situation early on was really a major problem for the Sabres. And lastly, they do have a younger blue line, so I was expecting them to make some mistakes. They were supposed to go out and get maybe a veteran top 4 defenseman. They got Eric Johansson, who's a really good veteran leader, but he's not and should not be an everyday NHL defenseman at this point in time. He's more of a 6th, 7th D, someone who can be in on some nights but be on some other nights. I don't think he's exactly the defenseman they were trying to look for this offseason. So, I mean, they have a lot of young D. They have Dahlin, Yuki Haru, Power, Samuelson, amongst others. So that did make a lot of sense to try and have some veteran D help, but they weren't able to do it besides Eric Johansson. So, in my opinion, the young blue line that they worked with this year, the goalie troubles they had early on with Levi and Luukkonen, not really knowing which one they would want to play, and the fact that the goals were way lower this year than they were last year, I think were the 3 main reasons as to why the Sabres team wound up missing the playoffs. If they're pending UFAs, RFAs, and draft capital for this upcoming season, first with the UFAs, only a handful of significant players on the UFA side this year for the Sabres. First, Victor Olofsson, who had 7 goals and 15 points in 51 games this year as UFA. He's a decent top 9 forward, but with the amount of talent offensively that Sabres team has right now, I would expect him to probably be moved. You have Zemgus Girgensons, games. Tyson Jost and Eric Robinson, who are all bottom six forwards. Johansson has 14 points in 63 games. Robinson has 10 points in 47 games. And Jost has 6 in 43 games. All three UFAs. I expect all three to probably move on. Maybe one of them are able to be back on like a low value 1-year deal, but I definitely expect most of those guys to probably move on. And then you have Comrie, who played in 10 games this year, had a 3.70 GAA and an 874 save percentage. I would probably expect him to be moved on, given the fact I think the goaltending situation is a lot more clear now with Buffalo. I don't see any Comrie back, so I definitely don't expect Comrie to be back. So those are some of the more significant pending UFAs that Sabres team has. If you look at their RFAs, there are a couple of decent ones. You have Murray and Brandon Biro, who are mostly at this point in time AHL forwards. Biro had 2 goals in 5 games this year at the NHL level. Murray had no points in 2 games. I expect both those guys to potentially be brought back as like solid depth pieces, but not as really huge pieces. You also have Peyton Krebs, who had 17 points in 80 games. He was a decent player this year, and I could easily see him be brought back, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he was dealt. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with Krebs, but I think that's an interesting situation to watch out for. On the blue line side, you have 4 decent defensemen. You have Riley Stillman and Kyle Clegg, who are more AHL defensemen this year. I would definitely expect Stillman to consider being let go by the Buffalo Sabres. I could definitely see him be let go. He didn't play at the NHL level this year. Clegg has 3 games played at the NHL level, 1 assist. I could see him be brought back, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was let go. You also have Jacob Bryson, who had 8 points in 36 games this year. I could definitely see him be brought back on like a 1 or 2 year deal. And then you also have Henry Jokiharju, who has 20 points in 74 games. Actually quite good as like a solid second, third pair defenseman, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he was traded. So we'll have to wait and see exactly how those guys go. And then you also have goaltender Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, who's got his contract expiring too. He played in 54 games this year, had a 910 save percentage and a 2.57 GAA, and was really one of the main reasons as to why this Buffalo Sabres team was anywhere close to playoffs entering the final week of the year. So I definitely expect Luukkonen to be signed. I would not be surprised if it was a longer term, like 3 to 4 year deal with the AAV of like $3.5 to $4.5 million. So I definitely like what Luukkonen did for the Sabres this year, and I definitely expect he'll be paid handsomely for it. But those are the UFAs and RFAs. If you look at the draft capital, they have 8 picks for this upcoming draft. Not an awful bunch, but they do have a decent amount. They have all of their own picks, their first, second, third, fourth, sixth, and seventh, except for their 5th round picks. So all of their own picks besides their 5th round pick. And then they also have Philly's 4th round pick and Florida's 7th round pick for this upcoming draft. So a couple of extra picks in the lower ends of the draft. Not too bad. And they don't have a whole bunch in the top end of the draft. So just their own pick, which is really good for Buffalo. And they're going to be able to draft some decent players again with those picks. And lastly, here are 5 ways I can see the Buffalo Sabres improve to get back to the playoffs next year. Now, they have missed the playoffs for 13 seasons straight, so that's really bad stuff there for Buffalo. So I expect them to try and be aggressive this offseason to try and get back to the playoffs next year. So first, they need to figure out their goaltending situation. That's a major situation for them this year. They started Levi, it did not work out for them, and that really sort of started a really bad trend for this team. Luukkonen definitely saved their season a couple of times, but it was not enough for them to get back into the playoffs. So given that fact, I do wonder about what they're going to do next year. Will they do the exact same thing next year and start Levi Luukkonen and try and see if those two can run with it? Or another scenario I think is very likely and very possible is that they start Luukkonen, bring in a veteran goaltender who can work with Luukkonen next year, and have Levi be the AHL starter again next year. I think that might be a little bit more of a easier transition for the Sabres. Have Luukkonen and a veteran be sort of a tandem goaltender, and then have Levi be at the AHL level, have him be called up if there's injuries or if someone's not playing well, and then by next year I think you start Levi Luukkonen in tandem. So that's going to be interesting to see exactly what happens there, but that's sort of what I see with Buffalo. They really need to figure out the goaltending situation. Are you going with Levi Luukkonen again, or are you going to go with Luukkonen and a veteran and have Levi play some more time in the AHL? That's going to be an interesting situation to watch out for. I think they need to add veteran top 4 defensemen. As much as they add Byram, I think that's a really good piece. They still have an extremely young D-core on that team right now, so I think adding a veteran top 4 defenseman, whether that be a guy like Chris Tanev maybe, or a guy like Shane Gostisbehere, not exactly sure who they would target. Maybe more of a defensive-minded guy, but I definitely do think that this team needs a veteran defenseman to sort of round out that blue line. I also think they need to consider moving Greenway, Krebs, and Jokiharju. All 3 of those guys are pretty good players. Greenway's going to be entering the final year of his deal. This team has a lot of offensive talent, so I don't think they need Greenway, so I could definitely see him move him on from him. Krebs and Jokiharju are both pending RFAs. They're both really good players. I could see him definitely be back, but with the fact that the Sabres, I think, need to make some moves on the blue line, and the Sabres have so much offensive talent in the forward group, I could definitely see him move Krebs and Jokiharju if it was able to get them some bigger pieces down the road, so I could definitely see that be happening. I also think they need to add a top 6 forward. Like we said, they're going to have a couple of UFAs coming off their roster this year. They have a lot of really good young talent, but I think if they could add one more veteran-y type scorer who can help in that system, I could definitely think that team could be a lot more lethal. I mean, I think they have enough room for like 2 to 3 more top 9 forwards in their system after the UFA guys leave. So I could definitely see them trying to add a guy. They will link to Scott Lawton before the trade deadline. I do wonder if that continues to be a potentiality there. Are they trying to acquire some other guys in the trade markets, like a guy like Mangiapane maybe, for example, from Calgary, or a guy like Taylor Hall from Chicago, or not exactly sure who they would try and target, but I could definitely see them trying to add another top 6 forward who can help this team continue to round out their scoring. And I think they need to continue to add young pieces. I mean, this team has a lot of young pieces, and they have a lot more coming. I mean, 2 years ago they added Peterka and Quinn into their lineup. This past year they put Benson as a regular in the lineup. This upcoming season I could definitely see guys like Kulik, Savoy, or Rosen be integrated into the NHL roster. So it's going to be interesting to see exactly what happens there, but I definitely think that they need to continue to add some more young pieces so they can try and continue to build up this team. So that's my opinion on the Buffalo Sabres. Those are the 3 reasons why I think this team wound up missing the playoffs. Those are the pending UFAs, RFAs, and draft capital for this upcoming offseason. And those are 5 ways I can see them improving this offseason to get back to the playoffs next year. And next, going over to the Minnesota Wild. So for the Wild, like I said earlier, I thought they were the 3rd best team in the Central entering the season before the season started. And obviously I was wrong. They got off to a really slow start and were never able to come back and get back into the playoffs. So 3 reasons why I think this team wound up missing the playoffs. One was that slow start. They're one of the bottom 5 teams at the 20-game mark. I think they had like 14 points in 20 games, and usually if you have 15 points in 20 games, unless you're the Oilers who can go on a 16-game winning streak, you're not going to make the playoffs. So I think the slow start was a major reason as to why this Wild team wound up missing the playoffs. I mean, they fired head coach Dean Evison, brought in head coach John Hines. It started working better under coach John Hines, but it was not enough to get them back into a playoff. So a slow start, I think, was a major reason as to why this Wild team did not do overly good. The bad PK, in my opinion, was another really bad thing for the Minnesota Wild. They had one of the worst penalty kills in the NHL this year, so the penalty kill was not good, and letting in so many power play goals was a major reason as to why this team missed the playoffs. So that was another bad reason. And the third one was injuries, especially to the blue line. I mean, they had Spurgeon only for 16 games this year. He's been out for quite some time now due to injuries. Brodin's missed quite a bit of time this year due to injuries. You also had a couple of other guys. I think Middleton was out for a little bit due to injuries. You had a couple of their depth guys like a Merrill and a Mermis be out due to injuries. On forward group, you also had a couple of injuries, like Foligno was out for some time. Johansson, Patrick Maroon, before he was dealt, was also out. So they had a lot of injuries on this team. Zuccarello was another guy who had some injuries. So they had a ton of injuries on this team, and a lot to their blue line, which I think really did derail their defensive play this year, and was one of the reasons why I think they are one of the lower teams in the goals against department. So definitely a bad thing for the Wild, and I definitely do think that that was another reason as to why this Wild team missed the playoffs. So just to recap, the slow start, which had them, I think, only with 14 points in 20 games, the bad PK, which had them the bottom 3 team in the penalty kill department this year, and injuries, especially to the blue line, were the 3 main reasons, in my opinion, as to why this Wild team wound up missing the playoffs. Now, if you look at this team's pending UFAs, RFAs, and draft capital for its upcoming offseason, not too many UFAs, only 2 really significant forwards and 2 really significant defensemen. On the forward side, you have Jacob Lucchini, who had 5 points in 39 games, and Jujhar Khaira, who had 1 game of NHL action this year. Both are bottom 6 forwards. I don't expect both of those guys to be brought back. I could see maybe one of them be brought back, but I could definitely see both those guys leave this offseason. You also have Goligoski and Mermis on the blue line. Goligoski had 10 assists in 35 games. Mermis had 8 points in 47 games. I could definitely see both those guys leave. I think Goligoski might consider retirement. If not, I don't expect him to be brought back. Mermis might be brought back as a solid depth addition, but I wouldn't be overly surprised if Mermis was gone too. So I'll have to wait and see on that, but those are the pending UFAs. If we go to pending RFAs, not a whole bunch here either. On the forward group, you have Adam Beckman, who has 2 assists in 11 games. I definitely expect him to be brought back. He's a future top 9 forward. You have Sam Walker, who has 4 games of NHL action this year, no points. And Adam Raska, who has 5 games of NHL action this year, no points. Both those guys, I think, are really good future, maybe 3rd line forwards. So I expect both those guys to be brought back. You have Dmitry Ovechnikov, who was acquired in the Connor Dewar trade. Doesn't have any NHL action this year or in his career, but he does have a future. I think it's like a solid top 9 forward, so I definitely expect him to be brought back. You have Mason Shaw, who got into 20 games of NHL action this year, putting up 3 points. I definitely expect him to be brought back. I could see him be a solid bottom 6 forward. And on the defensive end, you also have Declan Chisholm, who was a waiver claim from Winnipeg, has 9 points in 30 games with the Wild and Jets combined. would look pretty good for both those teams. And I definitely expect him to be brought back on like a short-term, maybe 1 to 2 year deal for the Wild. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. But those are the RFAs and UFAs for the Wild. If you look at their draft capital, not too much of draft capital this year. For the Wild, they only have 6 draft picks this year. They have their own first, their own second, their own fourth, theirs and the Sabres' fifth, and their own sixth, but they don't have any third or seventh round picks for this upcoming draft. So definitely a little bit lacking in the draft cupboard this year. We're able to get a couple of picks for this year plus the next couple of years by moving off some pieces, but they definitely do have a little bit less on the draft cupboard this year, so that's really bad news for the Minnesota Wild. And lastly, going over to 5 ways you can see the Wild improve in the offseason. First, they need to add youth on the blue line. They have already started that by adding Brock Faber, who's been a fantastic guy, one of the Calder Trophy finalists this year on that blue line, with guys like Spurgeon and Brodin being out for some time. So adding some more youth, I think, to that team could be really good for the Wild. They have Jack Peretz, you have Carson Lambos, Ryan O'Rourke, and Damon Hunt, who I think all are future NHL defensemen, who I think could all try and make a stab at the NHL next year. So if they can continue to add some more youth to the blue line, I think the Wild could be in a really good position. I think they need to consider moving Middleton and Johansson. Both are going to be entering the final year of their deals. They don't have an overabundance of cap space. I think they only have like $4 or $5 million left for next year. So if they can move some cap to try and improve this team for next year, I think that would be a win for them. So Middleton, entering the final year of his deal, has a $2.45 million cap hit. Johansson has a $2 million cap hit, also entering the final year of his deal. I can see both those guys be moved. Johansson's a decent top 9 forward, but the Wild have enough forwards, I think, at this point in time that they can make do without Johansson. And Middleton, I think the Wild could also make do without, so I can definitely see those two guys be moved. I think they need to add some scoring help. Not sure exactly how they do it, especially with the low cap space they have, but I think if they could add 1, maybe 2 more top 9 forwards, who could definitely help round out that forward group, I think that would be a really good position there for the Wild, whether that be signing guys like Max Domi or David Perron or Adam Henrique, or whether that be trading for guys like Andrei Kuzmenko or maybe a guy like Luke Cunnin, or not exactly sure who they'll try and target, but if they could add a couple of cheaper end top 9 forwards, I think that would be a fantastic move there for the Minnesota Wild. Another thing they need to try and figure out is their goaltending situation. Now, they recently, just before I started recording this video, signed Marc-Andre Fleury to a 1-year extension. So it sounds like Fleury will be entering the final year of his career, so he will be back for 1 more season. But we're expecting Wallstedt to be an NHL goaltender next year, so it will be interesting to see exactly what happens with their goaltending situation. Is it still Gustavsson and Fleury next year, or are they trying to incorporate Wallstedt in there as well next year? So it'll be interesting to see exactly what happens there, but Fleury's definitely back on a 1-year deal, so it seems like it will be Fleury Gustavsson next year, with also maybe having to wait until the year after that to get into the NHL, but they definitely do have to figure out that goaltending situation now. Fleury's going to be back. And lastly, I think they need to add a bottom 6 and 4ther. They did over the past couple of years. I mean, at the trade deadline, not this year, but last year, they had Nick Delorier. He worked really well for them, but then he left via free agency, so they went out this offseason, got Pat Maroon. Maroon has been working really good for the Minnesota Wild, but then with them being out of a playoff spot, they moved into Boston, so I won't be overly surprised if this offseason, either via trade or via free agency, they went out and got another bottom 6 and 4ther, a tough guy who can play against some of the tougher opponents, and it's more of that playoff style forward that the Wild are looking for. So it's going to be interesting to see exactly who they try and target, but I wouldn't be overly surprised if they try to go after a Maroon or Delorier-esque player. So it'll be interesting to see there. So those are the 3 reasons why I think the Wild missed the playoffs this year. Those are their pending UFAs, RFAs, and draft capital for this upcoming offseason. And those are 5 ways I can see Wild improving the offseason to get back to the playoffs. So one thing I forgot about the Sabres, they also recently fired head coach Don Granato. Obviously the Sabres did not like what they were getting from him over the past little while, so they fired him, and now they're also going to be looking for a replacement. So for Buffalo, another thing you do this offseason is find a coach who can help lead them in the right direction and get them back to the playoffs, whether that be a guy like Craig Berube, Dean Evison, Jay Woodcroft, Todd McLean, or someone else who has maybe not been fired but could definitely be a head coach. Definitely, we're going to have to wait and see on that. But lots of interesting stuff for the Sabres and the Wild. Those are the 3 reasons I think those teams missed the playoffs. Those are pending UFAs, RFAs, and draft capital for both those teams for this upcoming offseason. And those are 5 ways I can see the Sabres and the Wild improving the offseason to get back to the playoffs next year. So definitely, it's going to be interesting to see. But I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on all of this down in the comment section below. What do you think about all of this? Do you agree with why I think that those 2 teams wound up missing the playoffs? Do you agree of any of my ways I think they can improve in the offseason and try and get back to the playoffs next year? And what do you think about the pending UFAs, RFAs, and draft capital for this upcoming offseason? Definitely love to hear your guys' thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. So I'm going to talk about for today. We're going to tell you this video. If you're like to subscribe down below. Thank you for all your support and able to with all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget the subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below so I can discuss today's video. Also a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff for that. So if you check that out, leave a link in the description below. And I kind of see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.